I got around to thinking, you know how every once in a while you have sort of like a statement or an idea caught in your head, and then you think about it, and then maybe it's interesting, right? I got around to thinking what it is that beauty does when it hits the brain, right? By which I mean when it hits the eye, because the eye is an extension of the brain. And I think that what it does is that beauty, it stuns and minds, it stuns and numbs the mind, right? So when you see something incredibly beautiful, it could be a motorcycle, it could be a woman, it could be a flower or a tree, right? Or a whale. If you could stretch out what happens inside of that moment, what you will discover is that all of thought ceases, almost like those who have described samadhi, or um, total absorption and concentration. And I think that that is the poor man's way, obviously not financial, of accessing, of quieting the mind. Maybe that is why we prize beauty so much, because it is a very low bar of entry for satori, you know. I think that, you know, you could go and look at a Michelangelo or something in the museum, and again, if you could see what happens in the moment that you look at the canvas and you're taking in this image, then perhaps we might find that in that moment the mind is very, very, very quiet, you know. And those who meditate any occasionally get a little bit of it, right? I don't meditate enough to have prolonged experiences of it, but occasionally your mind gets very, very quiet, right? And all you can hear is, I don't know that you can hear it at all, but all that matters in that moment is the object. And it's almost as if the object is perceiving itself, even though you're there, but you're out of the way. You see what I mean? You know, like all artists, I'm obsessed with beauty, man. You know, like beauty of any kind, you know. Like you see, like in software, for instance, right? Sometimes you see a really, really elegant solution to a problem. Something, you know, you could figure out a million and one ways of solving a problem, right? You know, you use whatever tool out of the arsenal, and then somebody comes along and then they write, like, you know, 2 or 3 lines, and they have done the same thing that an entire class used to do, right? And when you perceive that, the same thing happens. There's a cessation of thought, which supposedly is the source of all suffering, and in that instant the mind is quiet. But that's not enough, right? If the mind is stunned into silence, it's still not liberated. And the question for me, the question for us, is how a man can be liberated, how he might be set free. Set free from what? Set free from suffering. Does the man suffer? Maybe the man doesn't suffer. Maybe you suffer. But the man suffers, right? We know the man suffers because we've seen his world. And this world is filled with too much pain for the man to be completely rid of suffering, or to begin to claim that he's not affected by it, right? Maybe the man himself does not suffer, but as a subject of the world, he is touched by the suffering of other men. So it's interesting for me to think about how when I go out to the park and the flowers are in bloom, and you look at you know, a Japanese cherry like the one they have out here, and it's got like flowers almost like the tiniest pieces of cotton hanging on it, right? And if you're paying attention for a moment, you think, whoa, right? Because it's so beautiful. And in that moment, you're free from suffering. But you have to return to the world. And I think that part of the problem is that part of the problem with Maya is that you go away from that and you think to yourself, well, if you think at all, you wonder how it is. No, I think that you don't see at all what just happened. You just know that it was great to walk in the park. But the reason it was great to walk in the park was that your brain stopped, your mind stopped for a minute. And you entered into a certain kind of calm and peace. You know, the same thing that sex does to the mind, right? It stunts it and it numbs it. And we return to the same thing in search of recapturing that state. And that's what's extraordinary about Vipassana and, you know, different modalities of meditation, is that it's trying to show us what happens when we're happy, right? When we're joyful, when we're at peace. Well, not when we're happy and joyful. I don't think that's what they will say. They will say they're trying to show us what happens when the mind stops, right? When we enter into silence. In a way, that is liberating. So maybe the next time you or I are drunk and something like the same numbing of the mind's incessant churning and churning and turning and turning stops, and we think, man, it was great at the club last night. I had such a great time. Maybe now we can remember that it wasn't being at the club that was fun. What really did it was a cessation of the mind. Silence.